Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The most scared I've ever been was in broad daylight in New Orleans. I've lived in Louisiana all my life except for college. I came back after. Went hunting with my dad out in one of the old spillways. The woods themselves aren't that bad, really. Animals are just animals. No, it's people who will fuck you up. I was down in New Orleans visiting a friend for the weekend and we went to the French market. It's right on the edge of the Quarter and the Marigny, which is more local, though yuppies from up north are beginning to run everyone out. So it's a fun combination of tourist traps and people watching. I don't remember any of the trip but this. I was checking out some African clothes a guy was selling and shooting the shit with him, and I started walking to catch up with my friend who was ahead. On my left side I glanced and saw a woman, dyed short hair, hovering between fat and obese, sitting behind a table that read, tarot readings. My mom is into that kind of shit, and I thought idly about getting a reading. As soon as I thought about it, the woman's eyes snapped to me, and she smiled. Now, I work with various people, many of whom are criminals, many of whom have serious issues. And those of you who work in those sorts of situations know the feeling you get when somebody is off. We have a ton of intuitions that we don't consciously think about, but all of us have warning signs that we'll listen to when somebody just isn't right. Little alarms that ring below the surface. Every single one began to scream. Every single thing about that woman was wrong. Her hands were like claws. Her eyes were like a shark's. Her skin was pallid and caked with makeup like a doll. And her teeth, Jesus. It was like looking at an image of the Cheshire Cat. It seemed like she had 100 teeth between her lips. Also, holy shit, this is running over length. That's a first. There's really not much else to tell, but I wanted to briefly mention the lasting feeling I took away from the encounter. I knew, somewhere deep down, that in that moment, in broad daylight, surrounded by others, I was looking into the face of a predator, and it knew I was prey. I remember staring at this thing in human skin for what seemed like 10 seconds before walking quickly away. I felt its eyes on my back until the crowd closed back in around me. Anyway, sorry for writing so much about such a non-event. I'm sure it's boring to read. I have some more shorter stories about spooky small-town nonsense, but they aren't terribly interesting.
I want to hear your stories.
Okay, here's one. So the thing about living near rivers is that they're damned inconvenient. The Mississippi is huge and winding and a general fucking nuisance by the time it gets to Louisiana. But for all of that, boats are still the best way to get lots of shit where you want it to go cheaply. And before cars and the railroad, the river was really the only way to get things done. So up and down the Mississippi runs what we all call the River Road, and it services all the towns that made their living along the river. Well and good. But after those towns were founded, the levees went up, and the highways came through, and the railroads were laid. The lucky towns had train stations get built for them, but most just dwindled. And once the interstate was built, the only reason those communities continued to exist was inertia. What all this means is that if you decide to drive from Baton Rouge to New Orleans on I-10, you'll make it in about an hour and a half on a raised interstate that rears through swamp and lakes. Do it on the River Road, which follows all the twists and turns of the Mississippi, and you'll be lucky to make it in 4. That's if you don't stop in any of the towns that come and go, with their vacant buildings and peeling paint and inhabitants who always seem to be lounging on the trunks of their cars and trucks from the 70s and 80s. If you don't stop to see all the old plantation homes that went to seed after Reconstruction, when the freed slaves decided they'd had enough of working the land, or the ruined foundations that gape like sockets in overgrown nettles with only burnt chimneys standing like memoirs to mark a family name that faded away a century ago. If you don't stop to look at the pretty fucking churches with their pretty fucking graveyards. I'd been traveling a few hours when I came across the church in question. Protestant church, done in that plain style of white painted wood and large clear windows. It had one of those historical marker signs that litter the states. No idea what it said, probably something about how some asshole founded the church in the 17th century before flooding and fires and frogs falling from the sky moved the congregation to its current spot. I drove down a ways to the graveyard in the back and hopped out for a look. I've always enjoyed finding the oldest gravestone I can. I'm into history and it's nice to try to imagine the lives of these people. The first thing I noticed was that the graveyard wasn't kept very well at all. That was weird, especially since the church seemed in good condition. The stereotype about us taking care of our graves is an accurate one. The ground wasn't very even, and lots of gravestones were broken or leaning. Then I saw the crypt. Most of you are familiar with the necropolis of New Orleans. We have a bunch of crypts above ground because the water table is so high. But it's not that high in the town I was in. In fact, that was the only crypt. And it was in the back, distant from the others. And it had been on a hill. I say, had, because something had gone seriously fucked. I noticed the crypt because of a yellow ribbon around it. When I went closer, I saw the ribbon was a ratchet cable wrapped tightly around the building. There was an enormous rent in the crypt itself, shearing it nearly on two, and the building had sunk deep into the hill. I went around to look at the front of the crypt, and I saw a chained and rusted gate. Which would have been totally fine had I not noticed three things in quick succession. 1. The disturbed ground was on the side of the gate leading into the dark tunnel of the hill. Not the side I was standing on. 2. Cemeteries are usually very peaceful. This one seemed patient. In this context, the difference between peaceful and patient is alarming. 3. The birds had stopped singing. As had the crickets. And the cicadas. The world was dead silent. I looked into that dark tunnel, and the logical part of me explained that subsidence and weathering had caused erosion, with catastrophic results for the architecture of the crypt. Which was all well and good until I saw the masonry that had been sent flying from the rupture. Outwards. Only outwards. The inside was very clean. Barring all the scuff marks that never went beyond the rusted gate. I love my state, but it is fucked up in a major way. Anyway, that's all for now. Hope that was sufficiently spooky. It's hard to explain how seemingly inconsequential things can be so pants-shittingly weird, but I hope I've done a good job of communicating my unease.
Been friends with this kid, Nick, since elementary school. His family is from Louisiana and his grandfather was apparently one of those Cajun healers. They pray over you in French and they're supposed to fix all sorts of stuff, from simple warts to cancer. Although I hung out with Nick's family all the time, I didn't know any of this stuff until high school. At that point Nick fell into a coma as a result of a condition he had. We were all at the hospital. I couldn't really get in to see him when his grandfather showed up. By this point Nick had been in a coma for weeks and his body hadn't responded to any treatments. The doctor said it was time to pull the plug, and in a last-ditch effort his mom asked Nick's grandpa for help. I still remember when he walked in and everyone just moved out of the way, even the nurses. He was a tall man, and he just walked right into Nick's hospital room like he owned the damn place. Like I said, I couldn't go in, but he was in there a while and I could hear him speaking French. Nick's grandpa came out and asked me if I was his friend. Yes, sir. He shook my hand, his hand was very fucking warm, and said, he'll wake up in a minute, just like it was no big thing, and went over to talk to Nick's mom. A few minutes later, Nick woke up. The nurses and doctors were totally shocked. Nick told me later about healers, and how their hands get burning hot while they're praying, which made me realize that's what I had felt when his grandpa shook my hand. His hand was unusually warm, almost hot.
A Grunch is a chupacabra-like monster in the folklore of Louisiana, especially around the New Orleans area. The creature is blamed for mutilated animal deaths and enjoys frightening people. Tales of the creatures date back to the founding years of the city of New Orleans. There have been actual sightings of the creatures, and to this day many residents are said not to allow their pets outside after dark for fear of them falling prey to the beast. Appearance: a 3 to 4 feet tall, bipedal, black goat-like being, with horns, spines, or quills covering its back, and glowing eyes. Lore: Grunches are said to kill their victims by one puncture hole to the neck and then to subsequently drain the victim's blood. According to legend, anyone bitten by a devil baby will transform into a Grunch at the full moon, similar to tales of werewolves. Powers: Grunches are believed to be intelligent, able to open doors and use tools. Grunches can also speak in a low growl, though they are best known for their screams, which some claim resembles the cry of either a wolf, ape, or banshee. In and around Metairie, Louisiana, Grunches are believed to be able to walk through walls.
Not supernatural, but in a woods. Louisiana. Home of voodoo, good, vampire scene, etc. Walking home with my cousin to his house. Just a side note. For being in the sticks this morrow, and his senpai sure had a nice setup. Huge ass house. Pool. Satellite. Wi-Fi. Like 12 bedrooms. Rec room. Workshop. Library. About half a mile from the main road. Half an hour from the closest town. Huge land. Peaceful. I was super jelly. Coming back from hitting the creek. Laughing. Bullshitting. Suddenly, he gets this weird look on his face and goes quiet. I'm not completely city folk either, and I notice the frogs and birds have gone quiet. He opens his backpack and pulls out his knife and a couple road flares. Be prepared for motherfuckers. We start stealthily towards the house when all of a sudden he stops and... Holy shit! Sitting in the lower branches of a tree off to our left is, I kid you not, a panther. A fucking jet black panther. An honest to God, green-eyed, black as the devil's winking Anya, panther. It's still light enough to see his crouching shape almost eating up the color around him. Cousin freezes. I panic and pull the tab on the road flare. Screaming like I'm about to get locked in with a Minecraft streamer. Panther sees flare and flinches. Cousin unfreezes, lights his flare and waves it around. Starts yelling some wacky shit in another language. Tell me later it's some challenges and the approximation of some curse words that his Native American buddy had taught him. Just non-profanity insults, cause their language doesn't have cusses. Panther hops down and pulls a skedaddle. We run back to the house and tell our story. His dad gets this look of, damn not again. Phones the sheriff office for the parish. Sheriff brings out a fire team and searches the area the next day. Tell us they found signs that it was just passing through and that it was gone. Turns out those stories you hear about jungle animals are pretty serious down there.
B10, living in a 2-story house on stilts that's old, probably late 1960s, in Ascension Parish, Louisiana. Hear rumors from the landlord that the place is haunted, but not to worry about it cause it's an old harmless lady. Fuck that, beginning of the first night there I was too anxious to sleep, be it that my imagination was running wild. You know you get that feeling when your entire family is asleep? That's when I could hear footsteps making their way up and down the stairs. The steps even sounded like an old person. Next morning, Mom says when she woke up early in the a.m. that a form was sitting on the edge of her bed, shifting around uncomfortably. She asks, "What are you doing?" Thinking it's my stepdad. Stepdad grunts next to her. Time passes, and every night something walks up and down the stairs. I was scared shitless and could never sleep peacefully. Even though the upstairs bathroom was right next to my room, I was so frightened of the unknown that when I would wake up to pee, I'd pee in containers in my room. True coward. Parents later found the pee containers and punished me. One early night I was alone, my room was directly above the kitchen. Could hear every cabinet being opened and closed, they never slammed but a few times. During Hurricane Katrina we were transporting water from downstairs to upstairs. Stepdad at beginning of steps, brother at top. I'm by the cooler filled with water on the ground floor. Stepdad scolds, "Anon, why are you going upstairs?" I'm still standing on the ground floor. He becomes like a scared kid and says, "I saw her," goes outside. Brother is 16 to 17 at time and comes home late from boozing and getting high. He says he quit coming home late cause she'd be waiting at the top of the stairs for him. Living in that place was the longest year ever. I would cry myself to sleep and beg her to stop walking up and down the stairs. Insomniac at 10, recently drove down the road the house was on, it's not there anymore.
I have this weird thing about me that I get charged and super pissed when supernatural or spooky shit happens around me. I served in the military police corps with the army. Going to tell you guys a story. Whether or not you believe it is up to you. But myself and 5 others know it's true and the scariest moment of our lives so far. Ina Fort, Polk, Louisiana. Doing rotation in the box as opposing force against 1st Infantry Division who were going down range. We're operating through the tick-infested grass to rustle their jimmies at 2 a.m. with our 240s and arty sims. We're deep in the wood now. Moon is bright as fuck and we're moving at a fast clip. I call a halt because I hear whispering. It sounds like the whispers of faint voices, wispy and hollow, like a pair of gunners have spotted us in the grass or something. However, it's the wrong feeling. My skin is buzzing and crawling uncomfortably and my hair on every part of my body is raised. Last time this happened I was with some folks in a haunted house and someone got smashed with a plate. Whispers quiet down, and I want to get the fuck away from this spot as soon as possible. Platoon leader calls us up and we start fast footing through the woods and grass. Private clumsy fuck suddenly yells out and falls over some shit. I turn to look at him and gag with the rest of the guys. I pop a chem light. Fuck me, right? And an eerie green glow is cast over fucking bloody meat effigies. My body is at DEFCON 1 as I spin around absorbing what the fuck I'm standing in. 6 to 7 5 feet tall figures are lined up in a pattern, covered with rotting meat that's glistening green and white from my chem light and the moon. Spec next to me is freaking the fuck out because we only have blanks in our weapons and has taken off his 240B barrel to use as a club. People are freaking out and trying to clean off the private. I lean in with my light to check out this one figure who's taller than the rest and has more meat on it. As I'm looking, those whispers are back. Wind picks up and the little voices get louder, harsher, angrier. It sounds like some kind of Latinish language, guttural and full of hate. The other guys are getting super panicked, swinging their weapons about and shrinking against each other back to back. I turn to look at them, and another PFC shrieks and I can see the color run from his face. My energy suddenly flares so hard I can almost hear it in my ears, and my blood is boiling just in the rage of having whatever it is around us. I snap my head around to see this piece of flesh slowly, sickeningly sliding down until I see through the green glow of my chem light that it is a fucking skull. I just fucking roar. My body told me this was a bad thing, and I needed to yell at it and show it I wasn't weak. I take a few steps back while roaring my challenge at it and the guys behind me are shitting their pants. Wind is screaming through the trees now, and the grass is whipping around our legs. the voices loud on the wind as if answering my challenge. That's when my body tells me to run, and I turn to scream run. Run now. Run run run. At the guys, and they fall in with me at a dead sprint. Trees are moaning and roaring in the wind, and that's when I hear someone behind me shriek, "It's behind us, Jesus Christ, it's coming for us. God help us, I'm so sorry," and he's crying as he's running. I don't look. If I look, I'll panic. But I have 4 Sims strapped to my fucking load-bearing vest. "Throw the Sims," I yell, prepping one in my hands. Someone throws a smoke grenade in panic. The wind whipping purple smoke around us as if working against us. I throw a Sim ahead of me, and it does its arty whistle as we run over it. The explosion is deafening, but the scream, the inhuman roar that followed, nothing can compare to the unnatural fear that shot through me as it screamed something so fierce and dark. Fucking 5 more Sims go flying past me, and as we run it's like we are being chased by a rolling barrage. We sprint, propelled by a fear so ingrained it felt like madness. 2 people are crying as they run, but no one has dropped their weapons or gear, just running. Running and being chased by whatever being in the pit was placed in those woods. We don't even notice it at first, the wind dying down, or the trees thinning. But we don't care. We just run, as fast as we can. Gear crashing loudly and our useless guns rattling in our hands. But we make the enemy base thing, and are greeted by enemy blank fire and Sims. But we just scream, "Open the gate. Turn on the fucking lights. Open the gate." We don't even wait for the gate to be opened, and we plow through the razor wire like mad men, and the private first class in his panicked shoulder checks the gate, going straight through it and cutting himself to ribbons. We follow him through, all of us. We finally crash to the earth in a heap under a big light surrounded by confused infantry. We lay there and scream, and cry, and vomit. Some have pissed and shit themselves. I myself turn back around, breathing so hard that I'm drooling and blood is running from my nose. I stare at the woods. I stare at the little green light I can faintly see in the trees, and even more faintly the white bone of a skull grinning at me in the pale, tree-filtered moonlight. I remember saying, "Fuck you," before I passed out and slapped my head on the rocks. We ran so hard that we tore our muscles apart. I got out in August at 100% medboard for service-related injuries. I don't like Halloween anymore, but I play vampire counts in Warhammer because, I dunno, I like that the skeletons are small and plastic. They don't move. Since then I've come to really like skeletons. But I still wake up in a sweat next to my wife, that fucking smell on my nose, and if the wind howls just right, I can almost feel it staring at me. Keep in mind, gentlemen, when I yelled out things like The Sims or something, I wasn't yelling like a hard ass or an operator. I screamed in fear, in desperation. I cannot begin to describe the kind of terror the situation put us in. He said it was following us, and by God I could feel it, and I wanted to slow it down. I screamed, in a fucking panic, to throw the Sims. If you are going to copy pasta this, be sure to include this. I don't know what was binded to that thing, but it was a horrible, awful, dark presence, and I've stared down ghosts and shit before with little problem, and I was struggling to hold my bowels as I ran in primal terror. I don't go in the woods alone. Ever. Without bullets.
Sorry, dude, but I didn't quite understand. They were living skeletons or what? Nobody went to check after this? An entire squad comes in crying like children and no fucking one send a squad to investigate? This is smelly.
The reports read that we were chased by boars, which are like squirrels at Fort Polk. However, due to our aloof and impracticable stories, they never investigated and simply labeled that part of THR Woods as a no-go zone due to wild animals. As for whatever it was, no, it was not a skeleton, but like a thorny, rotting wickerman with a skull for a head. I think it was some of the local voodoo shit that they practice because they hate the fact soldiers are on land they once owned. Big hoopla about that post kicking off farmers back in the 20s and 30s.
Kunas, Cajun, reporting in. Saw Louisiana mentioned a few times. For those of us who live here, it's not that creepy. But I could see where it would creep most people out. Apparitions, various spirits, not just ghosts, are an everyday occurrence. But they can't harm you unless you fear them, and they will usually become helpful if you acknowledge them and care for them. Voodoo is just a part of the culture and not that scary when you get past the touristy shit. Mostly folk medicine and weird superstitions. Vampires pretty much stick to themselves and don't cause any problems. Rougarous are a problem if you don't know how to deal with them. Just drawing blood, a small cut or a busted nose will change them back. But don't tell anyone for 1 year and one day or you become one yourself. A few cryptic Bigfoot-type creatures, Honey Island swamp monster, skunk ape, swamp ape, etc. They are peaceful and never harm anyone. There are some other things out in the swamps and marshes that scare even locals. But any visitors are extremely unlikely to come across them. The point of this post is really to tell people not to be so freaked out by the paranormal. It's not so bad when you understand it all better.
Louisiana swamps at night trumps all. Be fishing with Granddad and his Cajun friend. Watch sunset through the canopy of trees in the swamp. Bugs fucking everywhere. Granddad's friend has a heavy Cajun accent and can't understand half the time. He says something along the lines of, "Oh Lottie, the boat is running on fumes." We speed the boat down the bayou. It's getting dark out. It was around 6:30. Labyrinth of canals and bayous to navigate. We were about a mile away from Duck Lake when the engine died. Aw dis dad gumpies out shit. Granddad pissed that Cajun friend didn't fill it. Granddad lights a lantern we had on the boat and says that maybe another boat could help us. 3 hours and 5 sandwiches between the three of us pass. Decide to paddle but give up after a short time. Fucking no one out here. Too dark to see anything regardless of the lantern. Like a locked character type dark. Bugs biting every limb. Occasional alligator swimming next to the boat. Hear the airboat motor in the distance coming our way. There's hope.jpg. Airboat gets closer. Slowly become more afraid as the airboat gets closer. 2 pale sketchy looking deliverance type Cajuns pull up next to us. Granddad has a hand on a revolver. Black beady eyes staring me down. Paralyzed in fear. Suddenly the Cajun friend bursts out. Holy shit, is dat Chu Roy? Apparently, Roy went to high school with a Cajun friend. Roy was happy to give us some gas to get out of the swamps because he and Cajun friend were bros. Turns out they were hunting alligator up the bayou when they saw our lantern, too scared to think what would have happened if my Cajun friend didn't bail us out.
Be me, 17. I live in New Orleans, born and raised. Talking with friends in school. Says he's into voodoo. Turns out it's just a fake approximation for edgy kids. Most of the stuff he's talking about isn't even voodoo. Find it amusing, so I play along. Friend invites me to a gathering. Why not? Skip to the weekend. He and another friend picked me up. Carpool with his fake voodoo associates. They're literally just white stoners and edgelords. Suppress the urge to laugh. 30 to 40 minutes pass. Stop in a field at the edge of the woods. Walk into the trees. Pitch black and the only light is a flashlight. After a while I realize we're near a swamp. Party stops and gets everything set up. Did some research beforehand, and this is all fake and inauthentic. It's like if Wicca and Thelema merged, incorporated some vague Hollywood voodoo symbolism, and was then remisinterpreted by suburban potheads. Still funny though. Not really paying attention until this one girl starts having this spastic freakout and calling out to a spirit. Start to wonder if I'm on any drugs. Suddenly, the fire they started goes out. Zero wind, or even a breeze, that would have blown it away. Make a spooky sound as a joke. Everyone looks at me like I've desecrated a precious tradition. Irony.jpg. Ritual continues. Still just glazing over it in the hopes that we'll get something to eat afterward. Start hearing distant moans. Maybe an animal. Girl's freakout continues. Moans get louder. Oh shit. The others look terrified, like this is the first time anything has actually happened at one of their meetings. Feel something cold in my ear. Another moan. We just break and run away as fast as we can. Hop in the van and speed away. The freakout girl kept glowing about how they must have successfully called upon a spirit like it's a good thing. I turn around and tell her it probably wanted them to stop fucking around with fake voodoo. Go home and never mention it to anyone until now.
Background: I'm from southern Louisiana. Anyways, while I was in high school we moved into a new house. For a month or so shit was cool. Well, start from the beginning I guess. Shit in the house would always end up not where it was last left. I.e. remotes, car keys, just random shit. But it would always end up in the garage, same exact spot below the attic. Happened for a while, then shit got weirder. Lights on and off by themselves. Could actually watch the surround sound dial actually physically turn itself to loud as F, just eerie shit. But being where we were from, not abnormal, didn't really bother us. So we had 3 dogs, my sister's little mixed terrier, my mom's toy poodle, and my 145 pounds old English bulldog. Well, at this point, about a year in, my sister's dog was always the sweetest thing in the world. She began to become more aggressive. Always on high alert, she would do weird shit like stare at a wall for hours on end, growling and shit. My dog became more skittish as well as my mom. With all that, here's like one of the first times shit got really weird and I noped the fuck out. So I was home alone after school one day playing some Xbox. I have my dog and my mom's chilling on the couch with me. My sister's dog goes to her room, does it a lot to sleep in her bed. Playing Soul Calibur. Well, if you've ever played it, when it starts up, says the name in kind of a heroic announcer type voice. Well, it did, in almost in a guttural whisper demonic type voice, was like WTF. Seconds after that my dog Max hops up and runs down the hallway barking. House layout. From the front room you can see down the hall at the end is the bathroom. My room across is the office, then catty-cornered as sisters, then across as parents. Well, Max runs down the hall out of sight barking and I hear something sounded like it slapped him or fell. He's a big ass dog, he's kicked things off the wall before with well, he comes jetting tail between his legs and all the doors in the back of the house slam shut and you hear a faint whisper, "Come back." Remind you my sister's dog was still in her room. I fucking shit my own dick, grab my mom's dog, my dog nope out, call mom, her, tell her, she's like, I hate that house. Alright. Well, yet again one day chilling at home and 2 we'd like to talk to you about Jeebus dudes show up. I was going to tell M to piss off until I noticed one of them hardcore staring at the same corner my sister's dog would stare at. So I invite them in. Guy 1 is babbling on while Guy 2 is still dead staring at the wall. He may have looked away for a minute of the 30 they had been there. A few minutes later the dude turns pale as a ghost and passes out. Like when I say out, this dude got the Bill Cosby special. We try to wake him up, for a good 2 minutes before dragging him outside, and I mean as soon as his feet got out the door he shot up screaming his head off, about we have to get away from this place etc. They leave to give the dude water. About 5 minutes later I hear the most blood-curdling laugh. I locked myself in my room with Salt at the door. Post a few random ones I can remember from there. One crazy one left, will post if it picks up attention. Playing video games one night chilling. It's like 3:30 a.m. need more do. I walked out my room and there was a light switch to the hall next to my door, flip it and nada. I don't think anything of it. I start walking down the hallway and there is another switch for the hall right before the front room. Can audibly hear the switch flip and I froze. In the front room you can see a shadow darting back and forth giggling. My dog Max books it back to my room with me right behind him. Close the door for another solid 2 hours. The light in the hall kept going on and off and an occasional knock on my door. Let's see another one. My best friend came to hang out from a weekend of Blaze It and video games. Parents were gone. Was myself, him and my sister. It's pretty late. I go to the kitchen to grab more snacks and drinks. I come back, he's like, "Wise, we'll call my sister up." I'm like, "Dude, what, she's been asleep." Well, he told me he was playing the computer. My desk was against the wall door behind him. Call my buddy Jay, he was like, "Dude, bullshit." He said as he was playing he heard a girl's voice, "Jay, come play with me." He said, "You're supposed to be in bed," and he heard a giggle in the girl's voice say, "Eventually I'll get in there." Then heard my sister's door close, so he thought it was her. By this point we had already named the female little girl thing in the house Angeline. She wasn't really mean etc. She more or less played jokes. It was the male entity in the house that was the real issue. Alright, I'll tell a few more random ones before I get to the worst one we had there. Yet again chilling at home, had music playing and playing some Xbox. I'd keep my door open to listen for my sister to get home. Well, I closed my parents' door because it always gave me the creeps. It's just eerie room. Well, I'm playing and I get the extreme feeling of dread and terror. I look out my door from my computer chair and my parents' room door is open. And all I see standing at their bathroom door is a black figure. I froze. Next thing, I know the figure gets to their door in 0.2 milliseconds and slams there so hard that I felt the wind hit my face. After that you could hear voices coming from their room. One was Angeline and the other voice was the same one that you rarely heard. Whenever you heard his voice things usually got violent, unlike Angeline who was more playful, and just kind of a nuisance. This thing meant serious business. For example, I was cooking me some eggs or something one morning, and I heard the telltale sign of him being around. The surround sound would turn on, but not the TV, so all it made was a white noise. Well, the knife set comes flying off the counter, and cabinets start opening and slamming. He never actually hurt any of us, but still. I'm going to start leading up to the worst one. For about a month things were fairly normal, very minimal, of Angeline, which she was the more active one. But more paranoia felt, everyone in the house was always uneasy. My best friend refused to come over. The dog's tails never left between their legs. And you'd see more of the male shadow, more doors slamming, angry voices, and male screams and laughing. Well, one night we don't really remember much of the night. We all fell asleep pretty early. I started having the weirdest dream of a big black mass sitting on my bed telling me to murder everyone. I woke up to my dog Max jumping onto me shaking. It was like 3:11 a.m. I woke up and looked towards the corner of my ceiling. A small hole had appeared in the wall during the previous weeks. I had Salt near my door almost the whole month. Anyways, I see the same black mass from my dreams. I freak out and grab my phone and aim it towards it for the light. The shadow flies towards my door and flings it open so hard it puts a hole in the wall. Then I hear my dad losing his mind, and my sister screaming her lungs out. I hop out of bed, run to my parents' room, and the door is open. My dad was screaming that something was in the bed. My mom threw the covers back and it was my little sister. Here's the part that really bothered all of us. My dad had a dream that a black mass was telling him his whole family was going to die. Already stated mine. My mom had one of Angeline telling her it will all be okay. And my sister got woken up by a man's voice telling her to get in bed with my parents. We were all awoken by similar dreams within maybe 45 seconds of each other. About a month or two later, my dad split and we lost the house. I've been there once since 2009. So after we moved, it was me, my mom, and my sister. Mom was getting remarried. I joined the military, etc., moved on. Well, when I got out in 2014, I came home. Friends invited me to a house party. Lo and behold, where the fuck it was at. My old house. Mutual friend was throwing it. I asked the girl who lived there if anything weird ever happened. Well, about 2 to 3 months after them being there, her dad self-ended himself in the attic right above that same spot my sister's dog would stare at. Apologize for asking. Don't mention it was my house before. Well, the party is fun, nothing weird going on. Then I get stoned. I can usually keep myself awake. Well, I passed out in the front room on the floor. While I was out, I heard a familiar voice. I could go 10 lifetimes without ever hearing again. It was the male entity's voice, and all he said is, "We've missed you, so nice of you to come back and visit." I woke up freaking the fuck out. Ran out the front door. My best friend came out and I told him what happened. He was like, "Okay dude, I'll go get our shit and well get out of here." He apologizes and stuff. I can't even drive past that house without feeling sick to my stomach.
985 Anon here as well, near the Slidell area. I saw some weird 3-toed animal tracks years ago in the swamp. I live across the street from the swamp actually. I couldn't figure out what animal would have made it. I followed tracks for miles up in the swamp but eventually lost it. I did, however, feel odd, like I was being watched. I also kept hearing movement in the brush behind me, but it would stop when I turned around. Most likely squirrels, and I was paranoid from being miles up in the middle of the Louisiana swamp. Never did figure out what made the tracks. I still go to that same area today with a camera, just in case.
Central Louisiana Bump. Look to your grandparents for spooky Louisiana stories. Around their times, witches were serious business. My grandmother tells tales about a bunch of spectral orb-like things that would go around in her neck of the woods. I hear about balls of light seen in the woods from old people all the time from various different places here. In before swamp gas. To be fair, that is a simple sight that could be caused by an uncountable amount of things. There's been quite a few cults operating in Louisiana woods, whether they ever amount to anything. I've heard stories about cops being called due to people making weird noises in the woods, and the cops show up to find small stones stacked about to human height. This story always made me laugh, imagining some middle-aged housewives gathering in the woods trying to summon Satan, and then they all build pebble stacks in silence for 30 minutes until one of them accidentally knocks over their pile. Cue head shaking and laugh track.
The Honey Island Swamp Monster is a humanoid cryptid that is reported to have been seen in and around Honey Island Swamp, Louisiana since 1963. It was first reported in 1963, when 2 hunters spotted this creature prowling the swamps. Its tracks indicate 3-toed webbed feet. The monster was first sighted in 1963 when Harlan Ford and his friend Billy Mills were searching for an abandoned cabin, spotted by Ford in a plane, deep in the Honey Island Swamp. The friends reached a clearing where they spotted the creature, who kept eye contact with them only for a moment before escaping into the underbrush. Describing the creature, Ford said the following: "It was nothing like I'd ever seen before, ugly and sinister and looking like something out of a horror movie. Standing over 7.5 feet tall and weighing between 400-500 plus pounds, the Honey Island Swamp Monster, also known as the Louisiana Wookiee, is said to be covered in a thick coat of matted gray or brown hair and swamp weed. Its yellow eyes are seemingly reptilian, and the smell it emits has been called the stench of death. This primitive creature has long been blamed for the deaths of livestock and the mysterious disappearances of children in adjacent areas. Popular lore in the region is that the Honey Island Swamp Monster might be the horrifying product of a union between a chimpanzee and an alligator. And in the darkly primordial swamplands that must look much the same now as they did thousands of years ago, the existence of almost any creature seems possible, no matter how ominous.
Everything is haunted. Not just the plantations. Here's one story from my house. My great-grandma died on our property. Not in the house. She had her house moved into our backyard, and lived there for a few years until she died. Before she died, she asked my aunt to burn all of her stuff because she didn't want anyone to have it. After my great-grandma died, the washing machine would turn on at 2 a.m. every morning, the time she used to do clothes. Silverware and plates would move around. The clocks would go crazy. The hands would start spinning around by themselves. Doors would open and close. All of the activity stopped when my aunt got a large metal drum and burned all my great-grandma's stuff. She did, however, take two things, a photo album and a metal cross. She asked for permission though, and there were no consequences for that. The photo album ended up staying in my grandparents' house, which became my parents' house after they died. That's another story. Some distant relatives were having a reunion, and were asking for pictures of a certain relative. My great-grandma hated these people too. That's why they were distant actually. My mom finds the picture in my great-grandma's photo album. Not thinking about it, she decides to make a copy of the photo to send to these realities. I was in the computer room with her when she put the photo in the scanner. Before she could scan it, the phone rang. She left the room and came back. The picture was gone. Never found it to this day. It fucking vanished.
Was living near Lafayette, Louisiana back in 2007. Driving home from Walmart at about 1 a.m. during the week. Had to grab a new ink cartridge. Driving down the back road with no streetlights and a few houses here and there, but nothing close together. Looking ahead, I see something on the side of the road. Get closer and it appears to be a woman in a white dress. Get even closer and her face is wildly contorted and she just stares at me as I drive by. Wasn't sure if she was lost, crazy or some fucking ghost. I sped the fuck up and drove away as fast as possible. I only lived about 1.5 miles from where I saw her, and I lived in a one-story house with a huge window next to where I slept. Was so freaked out by the thought of her being by my window I decided to sleep in my living room. I should have said I tried to sleep, didn't sleep at all that night.
Okay, I have a story. Keep in mind I was only about 6 or 7, and even having a bad memory I remember this clear as day, with a bit of clouds. Mom is in psych ward for a year. Move with grandparents in Louisiana. Grandparents lived in country, almost swamp territory. Me and my older brother don't really get what's going on truly. Me believes in fairies still and all that junk. Grandparents humor this. One day Grandpop have to go out to help rebuild an old church. The whole house goes, cause there is a potluck thing for the wives and kids. The church is old and rotting, with a small graveyard in the back. Woods all around us. JPEG. The drive there was about an hour away, and was through a dirt path surrounded by nature. Lots of maintenance was needed to keep it from overgrowing. As a loner, even as a child, I'm not with the others. Off making flower crowns near the edge of the woods. See pretty flower a bit in the woods next to me. I need that in my crown, the fairies will love it. As I pick the flowers it seems I have wander in far to where I can't see the group nor building. This part of the forest is much thicker, not much light shines through the trees. Sudden I feel no longer alone. Here's rustling of bushes and twigs. I look all around me, there is no one. One thing does catch my eye. A huge tall shadow. Being a child I couldn't a height, but I know it was tall as fuck. Shadow figure seems to move its arm near me. It's beckoning me closer. I think. Are you a fairy? No reply. Stand in silence. Weird shadow still has its arm stretched towards me. Shadow is shaking. I take a step back. Shakes more. Another step. A sense of uneasiness fills my entire being. Smell of decay is in the air. I'm sorry, but I have to go, but here. I lay down the flower crown I had been working on and start to turn away. Loud fucking screech happens. Run. It's following, I can tell. Trip over log. Impact. Out cold. Wake up to a group of people around me. Grandparents with the group looking worried and mad. It seems to them I went off and tripped and hit my head. No blood, no bruise. Seem fine. I feel uneasy, I feel watched. Pile in Grandpop's truck and head home. On the drive through the dirt path, I see the shadow in the tress. It's following me. Go home, we never go back there again. As a person who loves to hike often, I fear every time I'm in the woods. I feel watched, I can smell the decay I smelt then. I saw it once hiking in Ohio. I booked it and ran as fast to my car as I could. I'm not ready to know what it was, and never want to.
Lucky to have found a community where people can talk about paranormal things without writing every single thing off as crazy. So, let me tell you my story. I was born and raised in Louisiana. I lived in a normal neighborhood in a normal house with normal parents. My uncle, on the other hand, lived deep in the bayou. I'm talking the type of shit you see in movies where there's a cabin on stilts with lamps hung outside in the middle of a fucking swamp. I didn't even think they existed anymore when my parents took me over my uncle's cabin for the first time. But here I was, right in front of it. I was about 8 years old at the time, and my uncle used to tell me stories about an old hag that lived deeper in the swamp. He told me stories about how she would come out every now and then to snatch up people who wandered too close to her territory and eat them. Now, my uncle was that special brand of asshole that liked to scare little kids half to death, so he would do things like this all the time. I was scared back then, but we took another trip out to see him when I was about 15. I had brought along my friend Tom, who needed a place to stay since his folks were abusive. Anyway, it was me, my mom, my dad, Tom, and my uncle. We would sit around this fire pit he had in his cabin where he used to tell me his scary stories. And he started back up telling us the story about the hag he'd told me when I was a kid. I remembered it and laughed to myself as my parents made comments like,
"They're a bit old for that now, aren't they?"
We spent our time there without incident until we were ready to leave. But me and Tom decided we wanted to stay over my uncle's place for a bit longer since we were having a blast over there. My parents begrudgingly agreed. There was a lot of crime going on under the heavy cover of the canopy of gnarled swamp trees, so my parents were naturally a bit uneasy about it. But me and Tom stayed with my uncle despite my parents' protests. Tom seemed interested in my uncle's story about the hag. Much more than I was. So, he asked him if he knew anything else about the story. My uncle, to my surprise, had more to say on the matter. He began explaining that the hag could be found if you walked down an old path through the swamp, but you could only reach it by boat. Then Tom had this crazy idea. He asked my uncle if he could take us to the path. I remember looking at my uncle, thinking he was about to break the news to Tom about his story being bullshit that was meant to scare him. But to my surprise he said,
"Sure, we'll go tonight."
I looked between the both of them. My uncle was smiling. He obviously had something even more devious planned for poor Tom. If only he knew. It was about 6 o'clock at night when we started getting ready to get going on our bullshit witch hunt. My uncle gave us each a backpack and loaded us up with survival gear. I had some reservations about camping out in the swamp, but my uncle was a crazy motherfucker. Once we were ready, my uncle grabbed his gun and we headed out. He got us into his boat and off we went. He guided the motor at the back of the boat while I sat next to him, Tom sitting near the middle of the boat, looking around at the surroundings that were dimly lit by a lamp on the front of the boat. I looked to my uncle and asked the inevitable questions. What did he have planned for Tom? Why was he going so far with the joke this time? My uncle just laughed and said,
"You're gonna laugh your ass off."
I'm going to switch to shorter posts so as to break up the story into easier to swallow bites. We must have been boating for something like 10 minutes before we came to what looked like a dock. It was old and rickety, in much poorer condition than what I was used to. My uncle had picked one hell of a venue for all this to go down at. At least that's what I thought. We tied the boat to the dock and made our way onto a narrow path. Tom was excited. This must have appealed to some sort of fucked up sense of adventure in his twisted little head, but I was scared shitless. And I wasn't about to be the target of the cruelest practical joke on the planet. With Tom far enough ahead, I got to asking my uncle where he heard that story about the hag. It was way too detailed for him to have just made it up on the spot, to which he replied that he had heard it from an old babysitter of his when he was a kid. He told me that there was a lot of history behind this part of the bayou. Lots of murders and occult activity. But he was a relentless skeptic. So, on we trudged down the increasingly narrow path. As we walked, I started getting uneasy. My uncle was too giddy with anticipation to focus on anything but naive Tom practically skipping like a little girl in front of us, but I was all too focused on our surroundings. The trees in this part of the swamp just looked wrong. They were twisted in ways that seemed unnatural even for swamp flora. Like they were growing on an uneven surface which had far too many rocks underneath. Their branches spewed out from the trunks to hang over us, like the trees themselves were hiding the ground here from the sun's gaze. As we walked further and further, my uncle stopped, as though something was wrong. He had a confused look on his face. He turned to look off to the right, scratching his head. He was looking towards a tree. He called out to Tom,
"Hold up a sec."
And we waited there for a few moments, looking confused towards my uncle. Save for my uncle's lamplight, which cast a dull orange glow on the trees that surrounded us, it was pitch black. It was a bad idea coming out here at night. I looked to my uncle and asked what was wrong. He spoke with a hint of worry in his voice.
"We were supposed to meet a friend of mine here, but he must be further up ahead. Come on, boys. Stay close now."
He started walking forward. By now I understood what my uncle had planned. He had probably told a friend to wait somewhere along the path in a costume to jump out and scare us. But the longer we walked, the more uneasy my uncle looked. The trees were definitely catching our attention now. Either due to my uncle finally realizing something was wrong, or because the extent to which the trees around us had been warped was starting to look utterly alien. I had enough. I told my uncle we should turn back because things were just getting plain spooky now. A suggestion which was met with approval between the three of us. We turned around to make our way back down the path, and there it was. Directly before us, dimly illuminated in the light of my uncle's lantern, was the most disgusting thing I have ever seen in my entire life. As my eyes met with the creature's form, I was suddenly overcome with a sense of crushing dread. The thing looked vaguely like a woman, but its proportions were all wrong. The woman, if you could call it that, stood before us partly naked, its wrinkled and aged form draped with bits of dark cloth which did not hide nearly enough of its grotesque form from view. It was deathly thin, and its arms and legs were far too long to belong to anything meant to be on planet Earth. Its finger and toenails had grown to an obscene length, and a head of wild gray hair hung over the thing's visage. It was twitching in an unnatural way, as though it was having a seizure as it stood there. My uncle readied his gun, aiming it at the thing. His hands were trembling as he fired off a shot. But as the shot rang out, the thing was gone. I heard a blood-curdling scream come from my uncle. And then the sound of the lamp shattering. The thing was on top of him, its fetid claws tearing away my uncle's flesh as it tossed his rifle aside. I hadn't even seen it move. I ran in the direction we had come, not even bothering to look back towards Tom or my uncle, or the thing. The light was gone, and I was running blind. Eventually I had run far enough where I could see the light coming from the lantern on the boat we were brought here in. I heard something running behind me and looked back. It was Tom, just barely visible from the light of the boat's lantern. We reached the boat and pulled the string to start the engine back up. It stalled a few times, but eventually it started up. We turned around and began speeding away on it. We looked back with just enough time to see it standing there, on the top of the dock, dragging my uncle's lifeless body in tow. I don't know how we managed to find our way back to my uncle's cabin, but we did. We immediately called the police and then our parents. The cops arrived and we told them what had happened. Of course, none of them believed us and neither did our parents. But something happened to my uncle. His body never turned up. But me and Tom know the truth. I moved to California shortly after that. But Tom's still living in Louisiana. He says he wants to go back. I'm starting to think he's got a death wish. I won't be joining him.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.